Okay, so this is dry fly fishing for carp part 2. So like I said in my last video, after my first trip up there where I did extremely well, I came back, tied up a few more flies, took my wife back out, and we went up and had a fantastic time. Again, catching more of these awesome fish on small parachute Adams that I tied on some of my carp hooks. If you haven't watched the first video, I encourage you to go back and watch that, or some of what I'm saying may not make sense. So let me dive back into this. So we were talking about leaders and why we do different things with our leaders. So monofilament for our tapered leader, we want to use, or I do. You don't have to do fluorocarbon tippet, but I do like a small section of fluorocarbon tippet, and I talked about why I like to do that in my previous video. We were using 10 pound. And, I get a lot of comments from people that are like, oh, I can't get them to hit anything unless I'm using 6 pound. Or, I can't get them to hit anything unless I go, and they go to smaller sizes. I'm going to be totally honest with you. I've caught carp in a lot of different places. I have never seen 10 pound fluorocarbon be the reason why a fish didn't hit me. Now, I don't fish the East Coast. I don't fish pay ponds. I don't... there's places that I have not fished that I'm not saying that that's a hard and fast rule for everywhere. However, if you're in the West, Montana, Wyoming, Utah, Idaho, I don't think the 10 pound fluorocarbon is going to be the reason that fish isn't going to hit. I've never seen that, not one time. I don't want to make blanket statements. I'm not saying that couldn't possibly be the case. That's just been my experience from what I've seen. Usually what happens is that the fly's on the wrong side of the carp touches or feels the line. Or they can, possibly see it. But again, 10 pound fluorocarbon basically disappears. I don't believe the carp can see that at all. I've caught them on 20 pound fluorocarbon regularly in areas that they get fished pretty hard in Utah. Fluorocarbon is just so, it just disappears. So it's a really good leader to use. Okay, so anyway, I got to move on from that so we can talk more about dry fly fishing for carp. So my typical setup for carp when I am doing, mostly drag and drop, or I'm leading the fish and twitching the fly, some of the other techniques I've talked about for subsurface fly fishing for carp, I usually use a 7 weight. I'll sometimes use a 6, I sometimes use an 8, but the 7 is by and large the rod I use. Dry fly fishing, I don't like to go above a 6 weight. Most of the reason you choose rod weights for various fish species is more because of the flies you're fishing. Like, a 7 or an 8 weight for a bass versus a 5 weight or a 4 weight for a trout. Well, it's not that the bass of the same weight fights harder than a trout of the same weight. It's that you're casting big, heavy flies at a bass versus a lot of times tiny, little, delicate flies to a trout. So it's a presentation-driven weight of the fly rod. For carp, this is where it gets a little complicated, because a 6 weight or a 5 weight or a 4 weight or a 3 weight, I've caught carp on all of them. You can absolutely do it. And it's a blast. It can get a little frustrating when you get them into that area of, those last couple of feet to actually get them to the net. Because sometimes they're just so strong. It just takes a swish or two of their tail and they're back to 10 feet. And they'll just sit there and do that on you for 5 minutes. Especially with a lighter rod. And I've snapped a 6 weight, trying to get a nice carp to the net. So, but anyway, so dry fly fishing, I usually, for carp, throw a 6 weight. I don't like to go less. Just my personal preference, purely from a backbone standpoint. I like the lifting power of a slightly heavier rod. However, I don't like dry flying with a 7 or an 8 weight. So I'm not going to throw any of those bigger ones throwing small flies like this. So that's what I run for these fish. All right, I'm going to pause my dry fly tutorial because I want to talk about this fish right here. I didn't... This is actually a 35-inch common that I caught on this trip. That's my biggest fish I've ever caught in the Bear River. Most of the fish here are I don't know, up to about 30 inches. You know, 10 pounders aren't like super uncommon. 30 inches you'll see fairly regularly, but to get up to 35, you know, and you've seen it in some of the other videos, this net, you know, and most of the carp fit in it. So this is just a fantastic fish. But this was not on a dry. I was walking along the bank for this one, and I saw it, and it was pretty clear, like, oh crap, that's a big fish. But he was tailing in the shallows. So I quickly clipped the fly, threw on a little, actually it was an olive carp maul. And I tie the carp maul in a lot of different colors. So it's just essentially olive with some olive and black barred rubber legs. First cast, I erred on the side of caution, put it out in front of him, kind of let him move up to it, and gave it a couple twitches. He didn't see it, didn't move towards it or anything. Second cast, I did the drag and drop, pulled it in, dropped it to the front of him, just to the side of his face. And then you see him turn on it and eat. And yeah, just fantastic fish. I think it's my second biggest carp this year. It might not be the second heaviest, but I don't weigh most of them. I caught some pretty big, heavy ones earlier in the year, which you typically catch bigger ones in the spring around spawn. But just a fantastic, fantastic fish. So anyway, I want to mention one other thing about dry fly fishing for carp. And I don't know that this would necessarily qualify as true dry fly fishing. It's sinking a dry fly for carp. And honestly, this works really well for trout too, especially in like back eddies and stuff like that, when they're feeding on similar things in scum lines, and maybe they're not hitting the surface real well, but they're feeding on emergers. So sinking a dry fly. Now, sometimes in this situation, it's kind of by accident, but I do this regularly for cruising carp as well. So carp that are just subsurface, but you can see them actively feeding. So out at Willard Bay, a lot of times, this is how I'll target fish, because you can see them out there 20, 30 feet off the bank, and you can kind of see that they're for sure eating things, and you throw a dry fly out there without any floating on it or anything like that. You pull it in front of the fish, and then it sinks really slowly as they come cruising by. So that's not really dry fly per se, but it's a good technique for those fish that are just below the surface that maybe aren't actively feeding. Now, sometimes this happened here by accident because you're trying to pull the fly over. You make a good cast, but then the carp turns in. You pull the fly in towards yourself. It sinks the fly. The carp eats it. So there's a couple of the videos here where that happens. But that is just another, tool in the toolkit that you can use in a lot of different places to catch carp. If they are actively feeding, just subsurface but not on the surface, sinking a dry fly, it's honestly a really, really effective technique. And I've done that, at Lake Powell and Pineview, Echo, a lot of different places around the state. Up in North Dakota, I did that on a fish. So, I mean, it's an effective way to target those fish that are just subsurface. So that's kind of it for this. I think I've covered everything. I hope for those that maybe have never gone out and done dry fly fishing for carp, this was educational. Maybe for those that have struggled, this was educational. Hopefully you thought it was a cool video. I thought it was a cool video. I've watched it myself several times because I thought it was a cool video. So anyway, I appreciate you guys watching this stuff. I appreciate the support. I'm going to go ahead and be quiet and just kind of let the footage finish out. Again, thanks for the support. Like and subscribe, and I'll continue to try to find cool places and cool content to share with you guys.